A 65-year-old man stood in a field on a cold October morning, watching 40 years of his life get loaded onto strangers' trailers, one rusted door and crumbling dashboard at a time, and somehow that day didn't finish him. It relaunched him. Mike Hall spent decades building one of the most unusual private car collections in Canadian history, lost nearly all of it in a single afternoon at public auction, and then quietly rebuilt it without anyone asking him to. Most of the people who watched Rust Valley Restorers on Netflix or the History Channel got a version of this story, but the full picture is stranger and more interesting than 4 seasons of television ever had time to show, and it starts long before any camera crew set foot on that junkyard in Tappan, British Columbia. Mike Hall came into the world on February 4, 1958, in St. Boniface, a neighborhood tucked inside Winnipeg, Manitoba, though the city didn't hold the family long. His father landed a position with the Canadian Pacific Railway and relocated everyone west to Kamloops, British Columbia, and that single move turned out to be the one that shaped everything that followed. Kamloops had open roads, wide fields, and forgotten machines rusting behind barns and sinking into tall grass on almost every back road you turned down. Young Mike found himself drawn to every one of those abandoned vehicles in a way he never really tried to explain, because it didn't feel like a decision he was making consciously. By the early 1970s, still a teenager, he was already sneaking along country roads in search of dead automobiles that nobody else wanted, dragging them back to whatever space he could find while other kids spent their money on records and bikes. His friends thought it was strange. Neighbors gave him odd looks. Mike kept going anyway because he didn't see decay in those wrecks. He saw puzzles worth solving, engines worth coaxing back to life, and bodywork worth reshaping with his own hands. Through his 20s, with no trade school certificate and no formal mechanical training behind him, Mike taught himself everything he needed to know about rebuilding powertrains and shaping sheet metal, logging thousands of hours in freezing sheds and learning through failure more than through any instruction. That self-taught education ran alongside a very different career that actually paid the bills. In the 1980s, he founded Chimera Springs Rockworks, a company built entirely around controlled explosives and dangerous terrain. He drilled into cliff faces across British Columbia, hung off ropes above open mountain drops, and set off charges that broke apart rock formations no other crew was willing to take on. The blasting work earned him the nickname Rasta Blasta, born from his long, dreadlocked hair and the daily reality of his job, and it stuck with him for decades. Through the 1990s and well into the 2000s, he stayed in that business and made good money doing it, but almost none of that money held its shape for long. Every paycheck found its way toward another rusted automobile he couldn't stop himself from buying, and the two careers ran in parallel for years, one producing the income and the other consuming it. Mike never seemed particularly troubled by that arrangement. He told people later he had never had a real business plan. His friends thought it was funny, and then eventually it stopped being funny. By the time the 2010s arrived, his 5-acre lot in Tappan, British Columbia, sitting just off the Trans-Canada Highway near Shuswap Lake, had turned into something that visitors described as genuinely surreal. Muscle cars from the 1960s sat alongside forgotten European sports cars from the 1970s. Old pickup trucks rested half-buried in long grass next to vehicles that hadn't moved in 30 years. On his separate 26-acre family farm, his wife had drawn a firm and non-negotiable line about junk automobiles coming onto the property, so the Tappan lot absorbed everything and kept absorbing it, and people who knew about it started calling it his field of dreams. The total count eventually climbed past 500 vehicles, and Mike could describe the make, model, year, and individual acquisition story of every single one, working through all 562 of them from memory if he had to. Some had been sitting on his land for nearly 4 decades. They weren't just a classic car collection. They were a kind of autobiography written in cracked glass and oxidized chrome, and that made the idea of selling any of it feel more complicated than it should have. That still didn't slow down the day job. During daylight hours, he worked highway construction crews, still blasting rock in mountain terrain across British Columbia. At night, he became something closer to a one-man automobile restoration operation, working alone in his shop because he loved it and not because anyone was watching. That changed in 2016 when a rockslide blocked a highway and emergency crews called Mike in, and a documentary television team filming Highway Through Hell happened to be on location to catch him scaling boulders in a hard hat and detonating his Rasta Blasta charges like it was a perfectly routine Tuesday. That brief on-screen appearance in the documentary introduced him to a national audience that had never heard his name, and the response it generated was enough to change everything that came next. Around the same time, Mike decided he wanted out of the collecting life entirely. He listed more than 300 cars and the 5-acre Tappan property as a single package at $1.19 million, and nobody treated it seriously. Most people who saw the listing looked at it and saw a salvage yard rather than a vintage automobile collection with 40 years of personal history behind it. What nobody predicted was that Mike would respond to the silence by raising the price in 2017 to $1.45 million, and the sheer nerve of that decision turned the story national. News outlets across Canada covered it. Photos of the car-covered property spread across the internet, and some reports put the vehicle count as high as 500. That visibility landed in front of Tyson Hepburn, a Canadian television producer who had worked on Highway Through Hell and already knew about the property from earlier contact with Mike. A show built around this man and his rusting world started taking real shape after that first conversation. Mike agreed to participate under one condition. The show had to be about something genuine and not just a camera pointed at his mess. He wanted to restore classic automobiles with a small crew and give the work actual purpose. Mayhem Entertainment and Cora Studios came on board. Mike built a proper workshop on the Tappan property and named it Rust Bros Restorations, and for his team, he brought in Avery Schaefer, a heavy equipment mechanic with serious knowledge of muscle car mechanics who carried the label Muscle Car MacGyver. His son Connor Charman Hall joined as the practical anchor of the whole operation, a calm and methodical person who spent most of his screen time managing the financial consequences his father's enthusiasm regularly produced. Cassidy McCann handled bodywork, and Sarah Ward sourced parts, and together they formed the kind of crew that works on television precisely because not one of them was performing for the camera. They were just people who believed in saving automobiles that the rest of the world had written off. Rust Valley Restorers premiered on December 6, 2018 on the History Channel in Canada, and the audience separated it almost immediately from every other automobile restoration show already on television. Mike wasn't polished or edited into something presentable. He told the camera he had poured nearly $2 million into the business, briefly tried to soften it by calling it an investment in his metallic hallucinations, and then kept working as if the number hadn't alarmed anyone. Connor pushed for profitability at every turn. Mike kept falling deeper into each build, spending past the budget, finishing cars to a standard that exceeded what the sale price could possibly recover, and then cutting the final number anyway because he liked the buyer. As a business, it was a disaster. As reality television, it operated on a frequency that most producers can't manufacture deliberately. Netflix picked the show up for international streaming in 2019. Car enthusiasts from other countries started making actual trips to Tappan just to walk through the yard, and the relationship between Mike and Connor became the emotional center that kept people coming back past the cars themselves. What those 4 seasons between 2018 and 2021 actually documented was a man running out of time against his own lifetime of decisions. Mike had watched his own father die at 60, and the question of what would happen to hundreds of automobiles if he suddenly wasn't around sat with him in a way that surfaced regularly on camera, not dramatically, just honestly. "What are my wife and kids going to do with 400 cars in a field?" he said once, and it wasn't staged. By 2020, the financial weight of running Rust Bros without steady profit had become serious, and a legal complication nobody had planned for made everything worse. The Tappan land sat within British Columbia's Agricultural Land Reserve, which meant operating a full-scale automobile restoration business there wasn't lawful under the existing zoning classification. Local authorities had quietly tolerated the situation for years, but when Mike began constructing a new workshop in January of 2021, the Columbia Shoe Swap Regional District stepped in formally. An application for a special exemption went to the Agricultural Land Commission. The local board supported it and pointed to the operation's contribution to regional tourism and the local economy. And in May of 2023, the commission officially denied the request. Connor stayed through all of it. He kept doing the work, kept watching the numbers, and kept showing up for his father even when the financial and legal picture was difficult to look at directly. Wildfire season in 2021 pushed the timeline forward. A property packed with 500 old vehicles sitting in dry summer conditions was a genuine catastrophe waiting to happen, and that fear combined with the mounting legal uncertainty and ongoing costs pushed Mike toward a decision he had been circling for a long time. He sold the Tappan property in mid-2021, which meant every automobile on it needed to move. The auction landed on October 2nd, 2021, no reserve prices on any lot, and on that single day, over 500 vehicles changed hands and spread out across Canada and the United States. 40 years of my life is going to vanish in one day, Mike said before it started, and he wasn't looking for anyone's sympathy. Some cars sold for a few $100s. Others cleared $10,000. Mike kept around 30 of his favorites, mostly muscle cars and a Dodge convertible, and asked every buyer to send him a photo someday if they ever got the car actually running again. History Channel aired the auction as the Season 4 finale in spring 2022, and the majority of fans watching assumed it was the end of the whole thing. The cars found him again anyway, without him going looking. Calls came in about an old Buick, then a Pontiac, then something else. By 2023, through collectors who knew his number and enthusiasts who understood he couldn't say no to a good story attached to a broken automobile, Mike had assembled close to 200 vehicles on his remaining property, and that number kept moving. Season 5 of Rust Valley Restorers eventually premiered in fall 2024, built around a leaner operation with a smaller footprint but featuring the same crew working through projects that mattered to Mike personally, including a 1968 Shelby GT 350 Mustang and a 1941 Diamond T. Off-camera, he had taken on a brand ambassador role with eBay Motors Canada, sharing parts hunting advice online and talking classic automobiles with collectors through video calls. A subdivision of the original Tappan land cleared local approval in early 2025, offering partial resolution to the zoning classification that had caused years of strain. Avery Schaefer had gone on to open Wildman Restorations and launched the Backroad Truckers spin-off in 2021 alongside Big Donnie Kleinfelder, but he never fully left Mike's orbit and kept appearing in the Rust Valley world as the community around the show kept expanding even as the original field shrank. Mike Hall is in his late 60s now, still living in the shoe swap with his wife and his dog Minnie, still working alongside his son, and still unable to walk away when someone calls about an automobile that needs saving. The collection is smaller, the overhead is manageable, and the work carries a different quality than it did when 500 cars and a zoning dispute and a financial spiral were all pulling at him simultaneously. Rust Bros Restorations still operates out of British Columbia, and Mike still shows up at car shows and fundraisers around the province, talking to younger mechanics the way no formal instructor in a classroom ever talked to him, out of real experience rather than any curriculum. The October 2021 auction that most people read as the ending turned out to be something closer to a reset, and the man who spent his entire life saving things other people had abandoned wasn't about to stop doing that just because someone watched him do it on television.